Innovating is tough for businesses. Companies find something that works that gives them that competitive advantage, and they tend to stick with it over time. Then that limits meaningful innovation that takes place in the organization. And since you are an innovator, you already know where your organization struggles with innovation. And as I have the pleasure of coaching some of the best organizations in their industry, I can tell you that every company can improve how it innovates. I think we would kind of expect that, right? We're all looking to be able to do better. So let's get some help and learn how to talk about the importance of innovation with senior leaders and the tools that can help organizations be better at innovation. Joining us is Dr. Bruce Vojak. He's the founder of Breakthrough Innovation Advisors. He helps companies survive and thrive in a volatile, complex, and increasingly ambiguous world. Bruce has a unique and powerful mix of expertise in product innovation, including as a director at Motorola, in academia and research, serving as the Granger College of Engineering at the University of Illinois they're located at Urbana-Champaign. There's a few of those, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Frankly, one of the great engineering schools of our time, since both of us did engineering at one point, and I'm aware of their reputation. Also, he was previously a researcher at MIT Lincoln Labs. His research and innovation has been published in several places, including his recent book, No Excuses Innovation, and his practice-changing book, Serial Innovators. If you are listening to us and you want to watch us instead, you can simply go to our YouTube channel, search for Product Mastery Now on YouTube. It is a new channel, and we would love the support. If you were to subscribe to it, that would help other product managers find it, and that would help us out a good deal. So that's Product Mastery Now. Simply do a search on YouTube. Let's jump in and learn to help your organization be a better innovator, and perhaps help you not knock your head against that proverbial wall a bit as you innovate as well.
How can you unlock your full potential as a product manager? We're sharing the product management insights you need. They are based on the 7 research-backed knowledge areas for product mastery. You'll learn to create products customers love, enhance your influence, and elevate your career. Welcome to Product Mastery Now, hosted by Dr. Chad McAllister, product management professor, practitioner, and your guide.
Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Chad, I can't thank you enough. It's just a pleasure and delight to be here with you and to talk about these topics, to share a bit together.
Oh, my pleasure is all mine. I've known you since that book. Know of you since that book. We actually met this last year at the PDMA conference, the Inspire Innovation Conference. One of the best conferences for product innovators, product managers, and unfortunately not known enough. The people that put this together do a fantastic job. And if you want to check it out, it will be in September this coming year, or I should say in 2025, which is probably when you're listening, in Chicago, but that's at pdma.org. Okay, back to what we're talking about, though, instead of just being great to have met you. You co-authored this book with Dr. Abby Griffin and Dr. Raymond Price in 2012, titled Serial Innovators: How Individuals Create and Deliver Breakthrough Innovations in Mature Firms. And I really do consider this a landmark book at the time, and still is, because it helped organizations understand who these people were in their organizations called serial innovators, and it gave some voice to people who were serial innovators. And just to make that a little more tangible for listeners, and I'm sure, Bruce, you've heard many of these stories before, one of the very early interviews I did back in 2015 when this podcast started was episode 029, so 029, was with Steve Perez. He was at Caterpillar, and we talked about many innovation things, and this book came up as well. And that kind of gave some terminology for him. And he said, Chad, I've been hitting my head against the wall at Caterpillar for 19 years,
Yes,
trying to create value for this organization and just keep running into barriers. And he told me, and then I talked to his boss later too, said the same thing, and he said, a lot of us read this book. We actually had a workshop. Bruce, you may have been part of that. You can tell us if you were. But
actually, Ray and I went there to do a thank you workshop or session with them because they had provided some people that we interviewed for the process.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, very good. Yeah. So Steve may have been a little bit more intimately involved with this. But he said, now in the workshop, his manager turned to him and said, well, now you know what you are. You're a serial innovator, right? Really was information that was based on good research the three of you did about how to get greater value out of these people that are wired a little bit differently, right? And I
Yeah.
admit that's kind of my background. I would be a serial innovator if I was in an organization and not teaching these days and doing some coaching. So tell us what have you learned since then in terms of the kind of the impact that book has made, maybe any changes in how you see innovators being embraced in organizations?
It's a great question, Chad. I'd say, and I don't think Abby, Ray, or I, any of us, realized how robust this concept would be. We studied it for about a decade before we wrote the book. We did several different research studies and kind of used them to triangulate what were some of the core basic ideas. But I'd say, as you've noted, that the concept itself has remained really foundational across a longer period of time than anybody would have guessed. And we're just delighted to see that. To me, it means we hit on some aspect of reality and we're able to document it. Your comment about how the person you're interviewing recognized that and their manager recognized it, it's cathartic when you hear those stories. And I enjoy that too. I'd say really where I've gone with that personally is in two directions. One is, and we'll talk about this, I think, a little bit more in a bit. I've worked more frequently, but not less with large companies, but more frequently with small and mid-sized companies in the last 8 or so years. And I've learned more about those companies and which ones are successful and maybe those that are not so successful. And I found that the serial innovator concept has been highly portable to those areas, that you see similar people playing similar roles. I'd say maybe some of the reactions and interactions with management is different because it's not as large of an organization, but you see a lot of the same things. And so to me, it just further validates this pattern that we saw in large mature companies exists in small and mid-sized, again, mature companies. I should add, and maybe you've been aware of this, I work primarily with mature companies and mature industries. And really helping them try to renew their businesses. I don't necessarily work with startups. I've done a little bit of work, but really focus on helping these companies renew themselves. And again, I just say it's been, from my perspective, pretty gratifying to see how it's worked. I have seen a few things that have changed over time. If you'd like, I can add that now.
Yeah,
Or if you have
please.
other, I'd say, in I want to frame this appropriately. I've had some concerns in how the insights have or have not been used. I've seen some companies that have observed this begin to, and I don't want to say lose their way, but I'd say because this is such a relatively rare individual, some companies begin to just not recognize those people as much or not be able to identify them as easily. And as a result, some of these companies have changed what they look for. And I've noticed in one company I talked to in the last year or so had indicated that some of the characteristics really weren't necessary. And yet it really goes counter to the things that Abby and Ray and I had found, that it really is the whole individual to be able to contribute. Not that other people aren't great contributors, but I see at times what I would say is a need for companies to refresh their insights on these topics. And the other thing, and I'd be curious, and maybe this is something we could talk about even separately than this, I've noticed what I would call to be kind of an apparent growth of the role that I would call innovation managers. And these are people who are more focused on process rather than people. And so in the past, I'd say that the serial innovators, were working in contrast to what I might consider more lean implementations and more incremental innovator type contributors. But I've seen more people with a manager title, and as a result, I think that there tends to be a bit more focus on process in companies. And so I'd say it's potentially a good time for this concept to be rediscovered in some organizations. It's like any
Yeah.
concept. After a while, people need to maybe dust off the book and go back and reconsider what all is implied from that.
Yeah, absolutely. This might be left field, and we can ignore if it is.
No, you're
I'm
good. What if,
curious if you see maybe any influence or even hypothesize any influence from open innovation, because as you were talking about that, I'm thinking about there seems to be things that organizations are more comfortable with. Certainly our MBA schools, I teach at business schools, thankfully I teach innovation programs instead, but our traditional MBA program teaches people to, in some sense, optimize operations, and
Yes.
that's very
Yes.
process driven. And consequently, it's easy to maybe overlook the innovators inside. At the same time, open innovation has been this thing that has really grown in the last couple of decades. And a lot of companies at least say, well, we do innovation by open innovation. We seek out partners, we seek out some joint ventures to do, we may invest in some startups to be able to get close to new emerging technology and see that as perhaps a more comfortable path. And I wonder if that, frankly, might not be causing the serial innovator within their midst in the organization to play maybe a lesser role. I'm just curious about your thoughts.
It's really a great question. It's phrased in a way that I haven't really thought about directly as these being, I don't want to say competing ideas, but competing for mind space with
Right.
people.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we realized, again, before we even wrote the book, that the serial innovators were doing open innovation, they were doing lean innovation, they were doing essentially a form of phase gate without a gate and phases. They were doing this before those were even concepts. And so the people who were,
Because they made sense, right? If
yes,
you innovate, there are things that make sense to you.
yes, Chad, exactly. And it's what's beautiful about it because we're looking at the data, we're like, my gosh, they're looking outside. They're going for these things. They're bringing in the expertise and insights that they need to be able to innovate. And so I truly believe you'll never hear me say, don't do open innovation, don't do lean, don't do these things.
Sure.
But I will say that as they get more formalized, they become more transactional. And I think one of the things that we saw was that the serial innovators are more relational. And I don't mean just interpersonally, but they're more relational with even the concepts and customer needs than a process. And so again, I think I'd have to look at individual companies to say maybe they've gone too far or not. But it's very consistent with what I said about there being managers of innovation. And I don't want to disparage people. I don't want to disparage roles. I genuinely mean that. But I think it's something that we have to be careful about because things can go in directions that we wouldn't necessarily
Yeah.
expect they would go otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the people focus for sure for innovation. We need tools, we need processes, but
Yes,
I'll share two quick stories with you,
please.
both from previous interviews. Ben Britton was, I think still is, the Global Director of Innovation at Snap-on Tools.
Yeah,
His background was at Pepsi. He's a food chemist. And how does he end up there, right?
I love it. Yeah.
And his approach to innovation is he goes out 4 days a week. He drags people with him from the company, a variety of people at times, right? Product managers, marketing, engineers, depends on the trip. And he's with customers in the field, right? He's out talking to customers, finding out what their problems are, observing how they're using their tools. And it's just very people-based. And the other interview, I wish I could remember his name off the top of my head. He was the global director for Reed Elsevier, like a 30,000 person global company based in the UK. LexisNexis is in one of their divisions that I had connections with here. And he was a 3-person innovation shop at the time of the interview. And yeah, sure, they would bring people in to try to, if you had an innovation process, to try to train you on how do you do innovation and maybe add some resources. But fundamentally, he was connecting people across the organization, right? That was his great skill, was across this massive organization, like, oh, you have an idea for that? You need to go talk to these 3 people, right? And he made the connections. And I've heard secondhand the same stories at 3M, right? That it's the magic of the innovation that has happened at 3M, it's been described to me in terms of the people who know the people
Yeah.
to help you break through barriers, to help you get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't want to say we forget that, but I think we get focused on other things. And you had just moments ago spoken about how many people are MBA trained. I have an MBA. I'm not ashamed of it, but most of the people we interviewed, in fact, probably all but maybe one, did not have MBAs. But they learned, if you will, business on the street. They learned
Right.
what they needed to do to solve a problem, to solve a customer need, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Customer needs are important.
Yeah.
Okay, so you made this before you talked about you've been more focused on the small to medium
Yep.
mature businesses in the last 8 years or so. And you have a more recent book that addresses this. It's called No Excuses Innovation, Strategies for Small and Medium-Sized Mature Enterprises. And would love to walk through that a little bit. One thing, I do avoid reading books before we get a chance to talk because then I'm more curious, but I did scan through some things. And one of the points you make in there is the case that if small and medium-sized businesses don't innovate, basically they're not going to be able to continue to exist for very long. Tell us more about that case.
Yeah, it's this classic idea of an S curve of revenue basically plateauing at maturity. And mature companies by definition are at that point where revenue for the most part is plateaued. And they really only have three options at that point. They can try to extend that maturity, and some of them will, most of them will try to at least implement lean to try to reduce costs and optimize their production and delivery and operations. A fair number of them will do what I would call more incremental innovation, which might be going after new geographic locations or adding some features to products. And those are all, I want to be really clear, those are all good and important things.
Sure.
But rarely, and this is anecdotal, but I've got to tell you, I hear this from other people. In fact, even a call I was on earlier today, I heard similar things. But rarely in companies with this profile, this small and medium-sized mature business, or infrequently, maybe I should say, to be a little more charitable, do you find companies that are looking to be willing to renew if opportunities do exist? So I'm not even trying to push this to say that that they have to innovate, but are they even asking the questions? And so this is why my colleague Walter Herbst and I, who wrote this most recent book, we really felt that we had concerns, serious concerns about local, regional, and in some respects even a national economy. And so this was written from a very different perspective. And so our view was to try to help those who are willing to explore innovation and help them try to find ways to renew. And there are examples out there that do it. And then there are examples that maybe have tried and failed, and we try to help, let's say, reduce the number of failures out there, help them see value in this.
Yeah, that's really good. This tool, your book, now gives me one tool in my toolbox when one of my executive MBA students, innovation program I teach at University of Fredericton in Canada, will sooner or later come to me and say, okay, I'm an innovator. I love these concepts we're learning. I'm in an organization that doesn't want to embrace these. I've been trying to share them and doesn't want to embrace them, right? And so far, I've kind of been ending up with okay, take what you learn into an environment where maybe you can be more receptive if you aren't being receptive there. But perhaps now I can also offer them your book and say, look at this book, see if you can get senior leadership interested and maybe re-spark that movement. I'm curious how you respond to that, because you kind of set up there for me like some organizations aren't going to move in this direction, but they really need to.
It's a great question and a great observation, Chad. I think our book is unique in several ways, but probably the most important way is that the very first chapter addresses the question, why innovate? And I'd be curious, you can tell me if you're familiar with anybody else who addresses that question, because most innovation books that I've bought or read or skimmed begin with the unarticulated assumption that the reader or the company has at least some appetite to try to innovate and renew. And we started from the perspective, you may be an owner, you may be a board member, you may be the president, you may be somebody in the trenches in one of these companies. And how do you articulate the case for that? How do you advocate for it? And we felt that we needed to help by just raising those questions. And even we have in the book, if you get a chance to look at it later, essentially my David Letterman top 10 reasons why companies don't want to innovate. And because you hear these things, I used to tell people if I had a nickel for every time that the company told me they weren't ready for innovation, I'd be a wealthy man. And it's interesting, it's fascinating, but I think that in a sense, it kind of shows that there's a potential fragile nature to our manufacturing in particular, but really mid-sized company industries in general. There's a fragile nature to these businesses. And to the extent that we have a robust economy, everybody does well. But if there's some external, even internal shock that occurs, I'm not sure what's going to happen to a lot of these companies.
Right. Right. Yeah, they're not
And,
prepared for the next thing.
and I'll add one more thing too, is that it also gives an opportunity for an attacker, somebody who wants to do this, to go after those industries. And one is actually on the cover of the more recent book, is a box cutter. I'll show this for the video. It's a box cutter that was a company called Slice. My colleague Walter Herbst and his son Scott, they have a company, Herbst Product. They do design projects, and they basically reconsidered a box cutter. And the
Hmm.
company's done quite well. And this is something that any box cutter company could have done. And so,
So instead of
one
just, for
thing,
those listening, instead of just being straight like the normal box cutter that I have gotten from Home Depot many times,
yes,
this one has more of a little handle on it that gives you
pr-
more.
protects your knuckles.
Yeah.
It's got a ceramic blade, and I don't make anything for selling these box cutters. So, but it's got a ceramic blade. It lasts longer. It's there are a lot of things about the design that, in hindsight, you look at and you think, well, gee, that's pretty simple. But then why hadn't anybody done it?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so,
It's a great example because I love when someone pushes through in a commodity space,
yes,
box cutters are a dime a dozen, so to speak,
yes,
and says, no, we can innovate there. And people
yes.
will appreciate the value we're creating.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I mean, clearly they have because of the sales that have occurred. But to me, then it should encourage those who have the appetite to invest in these things to say, "Gee, I'm going to look around even in my own industry and go after it." And in a way, West Tech Automation Solutions, a company we also profiled, they took on a project with a client to help develop essentially greenfield manufacturing capability. And the
Hmm.
client had basically no experience as a company in manufacturing. And they and others helped establish this, and they worked in a very different way. And unless you're willing to do those things, eventually you get left behind. So that's kind of one of the themes of why we say there's really no excuse to not at least try these things.
Yeah, yeah. An important point there is working in a different way. In organizations, we are putting out our widgets, and oftentimes we feel like we're struggling to just keep up with that, right? And the messes with supply chain and warranty issues and equipment breaking down and everything else. Even if we're writing software, it's all the same thing. But we
Yeah.
do have to think differently to be looking for those new ideas and take action. Because if we use the same management approaches, that they just get squashed, or we make things just a little bit better than they are now. So, what kind of tools do you see being helpful in this space to get organizations, or at least some people in their organizations, to think a little bit differently, to take different actions than we might be used to on the operational side?
Well, it's interesting when you talk about tools, and when I normally think of tools, I think about things like design thinking and phase gate and lean and open innovation. And but yet I think when you're asking the question this way, there may be another set of tools that I can discuss
Hmm.
as well. So let me talk about the first set, and then maybe I'll reframe it and talk about what might be the other set. The first ones, like design thinking and phase gate, lean, open, they are the kinds of things that can be pretty simply implemented in a mid-sized company without a lot of bells and whistles. And they really instruct the new person who's just beginning to learn about innovation, and they really refresh the memory of those who are seasoned veterans. They're things that they really keep innovation from failing. And they also at times can help, especially PhaseGate, can help align an organization. And I think that's a really critical need, and that'll actually come to the next thing we'll discuss. But yet, these are all tools that help companies avoid failure. They don't necessarily enable success. And that's why I remain a big fan of the serial innovator concept, because really the innovation that has succeeded that I've seen pervasively successful has been with an individual or a maybe two people, but not a preformed team necessarily. So that's the one set of tools that I can discuss. The other one, though, is really the tool of how to convince people and how to
Mm.
bring people along and how to get alignment. And there are really two questions. One is a more strategic question, and that's where there are tools for these. One is the strategic question, which is why should we even innovate? And the other one is a more tactical question. Why should we pursue this certain topic or problem or project or idea? And for each of those, there are really a couple of options that companies have to try, or tools, if you will, to try to convince people or bring them along. And one is to just make a convincing argument. And that's what we try to do in chapter one of No Excuses Innovation. We try to make the case that when you hit maturity, you only have these options. You either renew, you exit, or you extend. And extension's only going to get you so far. So renewal is kind of the option you have to at least ask about. And so a winsome, convincing argument, I think, is a really good way to start. Um, some people can get a bit more, let's say, aggressive in their approach to try to make political maneuvering. And I mean, I think that's something that we could discuss separately from this. And then the third way, and I've seen this work at times, actually going quiet about the topic and letting the momentum carry the day. And I don't want to say you wait entirely till there's a crisis, but you keep working in the background until there's a real need for these things.
Mm-hmm.
And these are tools that don't get discussed as often because usually when we think about innovation tools, they're more the processes that I spoke about before. But I think getting alignment is just a critical challenge in most organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, most organizations are a collection of functions. Those functions are rewarded for their specific areas of performance. And
Right.
oftentimes, creating alignment creates conflicts between those areas of performance.
Even discussing alignment creates conflicts,
Yeah,
and they don't have to be senior level positions that can
right.
cause challenges. I One company I worked with for a while, there was a great guy, a quality manager, perhaps a level or two down, two levels down at least from the CEO, and he could basically stop progress on anything. And I understood where he was coming from, but it really missed the point when asking these questions about renewal.
Mm-hmm. Very good. The going quiet approach, at least the way I interpret that, I call this the too big to fail approach, which is if you know there's going to be barriers to moving things forward, but you have the ability to do so. I've seen VPs in organizations that have the ability that know that if they were to innovate publicly in the organization, that it would not succeed. But they quietly push it forward until it's too big to pull it back. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, we're doing this new thing. And then interestingly enough, if I'm coming in to ask for examples of how has this organization innovated in the last couple of years, that's the thing that is held up, right? That is like,
Yeah.
there's no process that brought it about. There was no support for it. It was the serial innovator who had the power to make it happen, which is very rare.
That it is, but when it happens, it's wonderful. These are
Yeah.
just, I mean, to get carried away, but they're wonderful stories for me to read and hear about
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
meet these people.
Yeah. Yeah. That was good. I'll be glad to give you some details on what I'm thinking of
Yeah,
afterwards.
I actually would enjoy that. Not only appreciate it, but enjoy it.
Yeah, glad to. Okay, so that's good. So we got some tools. We've talked about these tools in other episodes, and we're not going to dive into them here. But some standard things to think about, like design thinking, really appreciating the customer, having empathy, helping to move to prototyping of solutions pretty quickly. Lean, you mentioned a phase gate sort of approach to help us manage risk through the process, and open innovation to get ideas from anywhere. One, I don't know if you have any experience with what Adobe did with their Kickbox program, sometimes called Red Box because it showed up in a physical red box. But this was their way to try to foster a culture of innovation, and they've open sourced it. And so at this point, thousands of organizations have tried this. And it's basically a physical box of resources, and you invite employees, say, hey, anyone that wants to learn how to innovate, we're going to spend this day together, get approval from your manager, 20 people can join, right? Whatever that makes sense for the organization. And you go through teaching them how to innovate and give them some resources, which does include things like if you need to get a 3D prototype put together, either here's some money for that or here's
Yeah.
our resource for that, right? And in the original box, they included chocolate and a Starbucks gift card because chocolate and caffeine are important for innovators.
I
But
love that. I've not heard of this. This is
yeah,
great.
it's great. It's great. And then the approach was in 6 weeks, you move through a series of activities to understand the customer's problem, take action on that, right? Kind of doing design thinking things.
Yeah.
But I think these are good tools to help people get involved that want to be, right? Not everyone wants to try to do innovation, but they're good tools to make the opportunity available for those who do.
I love that. And there's one tool that's never discussed as a tool, but the serial innovators practice. And they basically really deeply understand what I would call the unarticulated assumptions of a situation. And because most innovations aren't necessarily radically new ideas to solve the problem, but they're very often a reframing of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can use a box like this to help people dig deeper into what really are the needs and problems that are out there, I think it can help them consider reframing those kinds of things.
Yep. Very interesting. Just in terms of examples, you gave us the box cutter one. I don't know if you wanted to share another example of maybe an organization that made some
I can
changes.
just throw a couple to you. I'd mentioned Westech Automation before, and maybe I can just spend a moment. They had been approached by a company that needs to be left anonymous, but a company that was entering the electric vehicle business and
Hmm.
that had no manufacturing capability at the time, at least no large scale manufacturing. And Westech and several other companies were approached to help build this facility. And usually when an automation supplier is involved, they're either given very specific specifications or giving performance characteristics to meet. And in this case, they were basically brought in with these other companies and said, well, here's your general sphere of influence. You're going to help put the bumpers on the front of the car and go do it. And so they had to figure out how they were going to align with upstream and downstream automation capabilities. And basically, what the client did, not that they put these companies in competition with each other, but they had to sort out how they were going to work. And Westech rose to the surface on this, and they've done quite well. And to me, I think it's a simple but powerful example. These are things that they don't require, even in their case, a big innovation investment, just a willingness to try something. And then a couple of other examples. One is a company that we actually profiled with an entire chapter, Medtronics. They make battery management systems for the automotive industry. And they have a 40-year culture of continuously renewing their business and redefining what battery management looks like in the automotive industry. And they're just a remarkable business. I couldn't do it justice to even explain all they do. And I'm not trying to sell a book here, but they're a dedicated chapter in the No Excuses Innovation book. And then the third example I want to give, because it's the most widely accessible, and that's Moneyball. I don't know if you've
The
seen
movie.
the movie, and
Yeah.
I've been teased that I still watch DVDs once in a while as opposed to streaming. But I think Moneyball is perhaps the best illustration of innovation that you can imagine, because it really dedicates a great deal of time on how Billy Bean and the other character, the composite character, how they navigated that organization and how they managed to change an organization that was, you know, let's face it, baseball was a 100-plus-year-old industry, if you will, at the time. And they had very conventional ways of operating. And in Moneyball, they tell the story of how that was upended and
Hmm.
how it succeeded and how difficult it was to move the organization. And so going back to our discussion earlier, even on what are tools you can use to move an organization, I think Moneyball is just a great couple-hour, enjoyable pop some popcorn tutorial on how to innovate in a mature industry. So,
It's a great movie,
yeah,
and now I want to watch it this weekend because you mentioned it.
yeah,
Watch it again.
yeah.
Um,
I revisit it periodically.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. It's a great movie. Okay, good examples and more details in the book for sure. I always ask guests for a innovation quote. I love them in innovation. The innovative listeners love them as well. First, I also want to tell everyone just about things that we've talked about here. Kind of my key takeaway is we need people that kind of think differently, right? And if you're listening to this podcast, you're somehow involved in product innovation, product management, to think differently. And there's lots of tools out there to help us get our hands around. And the tool that I put together is based on the body of knowledge from the conference where Bruce and I met, actually. That's PDMA, the Product Development Management Association. And they've been doing this since 1976, right? This organization has been around a long time, researching the space of how do we innovate, do a better job creating products and services. And if you really want to be a professional in the world of product innovation, you need to get some skills around you for that. The system that I created is called Rapid Product Mastery Experience, the RPM RPM experience. It teaches those 7 research-backed knowledge areas to help you be a professional product manager or innovator. It also prepares you for certification from PDMA if you're interested in professional certification. But this is a great way to get you on the same page with others if you're doing it with them, or just to prepare you for your next step of your career as well, to take a serious look at these 7 knowledge areas to be more competent in what one needs to do. And it's a great way for individuals to skill up or for teams to skill up. And I really enjoy the opportunity to work with teams of product managers or product teams to work better together and learn these concepts. Always good things come out of that. If you want to find out more about that, simply go to productmasterynow.com/RPM and see how it might help you. It is a go-to resource for professional product people and will help your career as well. Let's move to innovation quotes, Bruce. We talked about quotes before. I don't know if you'll be able to limit yourself to one or not, but let's see what you got for us.
I have 2. Sorry, Chad.
Go right ahead.
Perhaps my favorite, and this dates back to probably 2010. I had been going around sharing some of the early results on the serial innovator work. And one of the contexts was a group of maybe 24 presidents and owners of small and mid-sized companies, which wasn't exactly the target at the time. And I got done with the talk, and I just happened to start talking to this one guy, and the first words out of his mouth were, "We have a guy like that. His name's Kevin." And it turns out that was Steve McShane, the founder and CEO of Medtronics. I had alluded to them before. A few years later, after getting to know Steve and the company a bit, Steve asked me to join their board. And until I was on the board for 16 years, until just this last spring, a marvelous group of people. And Steve is a marvelous guy, and Kevin is a marvelous guy. And where I'm going with this is that simple statement, we have a guy like that. His name's Kevin.
Right.
It's so personalized it. And it's so personalized, not only Kevin is the innovator, but Steve is the person who perceived, valued, and invested and nourished that. And so it really brought everything together in the Serial Innovator book in like one 2-part sentence. And I just smile to this day when I think about him saying that. Because to me, it just it encapsulated, and he was totally accurate. Kevin is just a remarkable innovator. He's just fun to watch. So
we have a guy like that. That's like the story of Steve Perez I told earlier, right? A Caterpillar. That's right.
Yeah.
And I think that's freeing too, right?
Yes.
There's a little bit of language and support now. It's like, okay, maybe I have a shot at making more of a difference there that I'm trying to do over all these years.
Yeah, and then it's real, that it's not just trying to push a boulder up a hill. Now, I've got another quote.
Okay.
And let me give you the context. Nancy Dawes is a friend and a colleague of mine. She's retired from Procter & Gamble. She was a Vic Mills fellow there, which is their highest levels of innovator. And she had been responsible over her career from multiple innovations. And it's actually pretty amazing because not many people innovate in multiple domains, but she had innovated in chocolate chip cookies. She renewed Pringles crisps in a really game-changing way. And then she really was responsible for the renewal of Olay skincare products from what had been that my grandmother's pink beauty fluid.
Exactly. Big change.
To what Olay is today. Massive change.
Yeah.
I mean, just
very impressive.
And in different domains. And so I've always enjoyed talking to her and hearing her thoughts. And a number of years ago, when she was visiting campus, I had the opportunity to have lunch with her because she was on campus to speak to a class that Ray Price was teaching. And so we're talking over lunch. And what's been on my mind, and this is something that you and I can discuss another time even, is how these innovators come to know what to do. Because that's been the driving force for me throughout my entire career of both innovating, leading innovation, and studying innovation. How do you know what to do? And so we're having lunch, and I said, Nancy, how do you know what to do? And she doesn't even look up, and she says, I see dead people. Okay, now, have you seen the movie The Sixth Sense?
I have not seen the movie.
Okay.
I know the phrase. I
So-
know the context.
Now I'm holding up the DVD cover of The Sixth Sense here. They're the only two DVD covers I brought to our conversation. But I had not seen the movie, and I knew Nancy pretty well by then. And I thought, who is this woman? What's this all about? And what it did was, And again, obviously it's a metaphor, but what it did was it opened up the conversation that we had about what it means for innovators to know what to do. And she just started then sharing very comfortably about how early in her career she would see things. And again, I'm not trying to make this anything other than she would see patterns in customer needs, patterns in the organizational needs and how to navigate the organization. She saw how to navigate things in ways that other people didn't. And so her metaphor at the time was to say, I see dead people. I see things that other people don't see, basically. But then, so first she saw these things and had, I don't want to say, well, she had some self doubt about it. Was I really seeing these things? And then she began
Right.
to realize, yes, I really am.
Why aren't others, right? If this is real,
Yes,
someone else should be seeing this. Yeah.
yes. And so then she had to become comfortable. Yeah, I really am seeing these things. And then, and this is the beauty of all the people who truly have succeeded as serial innovators, she accepted that there was responsibility that she had to bring other people along. And in a matter of minutes, I mean, probably just about as long as it's taking me to share this with you, she could capture that entire story and share it because she saw something that other people didn't see. Now, again, it's still kind of, it raises the question for me, how do I describe what that looks like? And I've got other metaphors, again, for another time because there's more than we have time for today. But I just find it fascinating. So these two quotes, we've got a guy like that. His name is Kevin, personalized. And oh, by the way, the Kevin's equivalent in P&G, Nancy Dawes, she sees dead people. So okay, and it shows just how unique and rare and powerful these people are in an organization, and how
Yep.
when identified and nurtured and developed well, the return on investment is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And especially the connection to her feeling a responsibility to bring others along, right?
Isn't
To
that
help
wonderful?
them see it too.
Yeah, it's wonder to
Yep.
me. It's I get excited by these stories. I know
Yep.
maybe it sounds silly, but it really is powerful to hear this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a little personal self-reflection. I really enjoy that front end of innovation, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the customer's problem, figuring that out, coming up with solutions, and I've been really good at that. And it's been tough for me. I never planned to fall into teaching, right? It's totally
Yeah.
unexpected. And I've been doing it for quite a bit now, but only in the last few years, I'll admit, Bruce, have I gotten comfortable with the notion like, okay, I don't have to be the one doing the innovation. There's a whole lot of value in helping others see how to do it too. And for a little bit, I was kind of sad about that, right? That like I'm leaving this thing that is my ideal job behind in
Yeah.
some sense. And guess what? This is my new ideal job. I figured out that this is the thing I'm good at and where I should be spending time. And sure, I love helping companies every now and then, but this is really rewarding to help other people see how to innovate. And maybe I will adopt this. I have to watch the movie first because I only see clips, but I
Well,
see
yeah,
dead people.
the movie is just the metaphor. I'm not
Right.
because I had to go back and watch it later, and it doesn't really. It's not like Moneyball is an illustration.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just this concept. But and I'll add quickly, Chad, as you're talking, I'd say you have both sets of expertise, and both are important. It's not
Mhm.
just the innovating. It's not just helping others see it, but having both, and that's pretty powerful. So I'd run with that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Good feedback. Thank you for that. Okay. How can people find out about your books, about work that you do? You're certainly
Yeah.
involved in helping organizations transform, especially sounds like in this small to medium space right now with mature organizations. There's listeners that will want to reach out to you to learn more. So tell us how to make that happen.
Yeah, it's great. I have a website, a rather simple website. It's breakthroughinnovationadvisors.com. If you just do a search on Breakthrough Innovation Advisors or my name, you'll find it. And there they can email me and we'll talk. Or I may have left a phone number there too. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. I mean, I'd say pretty accessible on either of those two ways. And if they want to just screen things at a time, I'd say pick up one or both of the books. In all sense of humor here, I don't make a lot of money on selling books, so I'm
None
not
of us
trying to
do.
pitch that as anything other than to say I think it'll help. If
Right.
somebody's interested, it's a good place to start, is really what I'm trying to
Yep.
suggest. And
Yep.
I'd be delighted to talk to anybody. In fact, I just shared this with someone else earlier this morning that not that these conversations are here to entertain me, but I always enjoy them. And Chad, I'll tell you, today's been no exception to that. It's just been great. I always learn something and enjoy hearing like-minded people and their views about these things. So thank you.
It's been a delightful conversation for me as well. We should certainly do it again. And for listeners to find those books, Serial Innovators was such a delight for me when I stumbled across it years ago. And No Excuses Innovation will be one to add to my list now to check out. So, and if we want to make it easy to find those, I know they're mentioned also on your website. You certainly find them at Amazon and places. But breakthroughinnovationadvisors.com, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both available on Amazon. I should add, too, they're both published by Stanford University Press. So it's a good source for that kind of information. So.
Excellent. Bruce, thanks for joining us. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And listeners, if you want to find the written article of everything we discussed about being a serial innovator, about No Excuses Innovation, about how we can help our organizations innovate better, and maybe if you're hitting your head against that proverbial wall, figure out how to usher resources and get others moving along with you as well. Go to productmasterynow.com/524 to find those written resources. And also as a reminder, if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, that would be most helpful. And that's just Product Mastery Now at YouTube. As always, everyone, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.